I want to share some words about the history of our society. And as many of you know, the International Society for Universal Dialogue was founded here in Warsaw in November of 1989. Today, we return to our birthplace. This is a time for homecoming. This is a time for celebration. This is a time to reflect on our past and to recall our guiding values and to imagine and reimagine our future. Among those guiding values is ISUD's commitment to promote philosophical discourse aimed at the realization of a decent, peaceful, and just world order. We aim to promote intercultural dialogue as a means to cultivate the highest and richest human values in all dimensions of life. As ISUD members and as philosophers, we are duty-bound to honor these ideals and to infuse this homecoming and celebration with the spirit of philosophy. As philosophers, we do not honor any ideals and values by an uncritical acceptance. As philosophers, we honor these ideals and values through reflection and dialogue that features critique, clarification, and renewal of those ideals and values. Only through this process, critique, clarification, and renewal, do they remain bright and vibrant. Only through this process do they remain the source of creativity. So please allow me to reflect on a small part of some of the history and perhaps some of the mythology of our society. In doing so, I will say a few words about the guiding telos of our society and a few words about the theme of our conference. I will speak from my own personal point of view. In the spring of 1989, I was a young philosopher seeking to establish a research record, wanting to contribute to the great enterprise of philosophical thinking. I came across a call for papers, an invitation to present a paper at the International Symposium of Universalism. This was intriguing for both philosophical and for political reasons. Poland was undergoing a dramatic transformation and a political revitalization. The eyes of the world were on Poland. This call for papers was also philosophically intriguing. The notion of universalism seemed to me to be contrary to the prevailing ethos within contemporary philosophy. The ethos of pluralism had dominated contemporary philosophy. This ethos of pluralism sought to articulate and celebrate differences that the voices of pluralism claimed were silenced by traditional universalist ideology. Traditional universalism had been the target of widespread philosophical critique. It was common to hear that traditional universalism called for a single worldview for all, a worldview that always ended in dogmatic views of freedom, justice, and truth, dogmatic views that were asserted to be final and complete. Traditional forms of universalism came to be seen as threats to swallow up all cultural differences, and if necessary, to do so by violence and power. Critics of such traditional forms of universalism argued that within such dogmatic worldviews, rational discourse was reduced to a monologue among the voices of power. The results of such a monologue expressed itself as colonialism, Eurocentrism, and other pseudo-justifications of elitist power. As a remedy for such dogmatism, the ethos of pluralism sought to articulate, defend, and celebrate long silenced differences silenced by the hegemony of the cult of identity. And yet this call for papers seemed to suggest a new form of universalism, one that began and ended in dialogue, a new form of universalism that offered resistance to the temptation of premature epistemic closure and the corresponding attitude of universal legislative authority. I arrived in Warsaw after an overnight train ride from Berlin. I was anxious to experience the political transformation that had stunned and inspired much of the world. A spirit of renewal was in the air and in the streets. A spirit of energy, creativity, and hope, a sense of a historical moment too young and too fresh to be completely understood. Over the course of the next week, the International Symposium on Universalism concluded with the founding of the International Society for Universalism. The society was founded to promote philosophical research aimed not at the establishment of a final and rigid ideology, but rather a cooperative search for meaning and shared values. Meaning and values to be forged from the gentle and forgiving spirit of dialogue. This admittedly idealist vision was tempered with a touch of realism, a sense of relevancy and admiration for the courage of the Polish people and their nonviolent and indisputably world historical and peaceful political transformation. As you can imagine, this was a thrilling and philosophically challenging event for a young and idealistic philosopher. Surrounded by an impressive cast of global scholars, our deliberations had a sense of historical importance, a sense made more real on my return trip home that began with a 5 a.m. train ride back to Berlin. On my arrival in Berlin, I quickly discovered that the gates of the Berlin Wall had opened a few hours earlier. I was privileged to watch hundreds, perhaps thousands, of celebrating East Berliners stream through those infamous gates. They were greeted with flowers, chocolates, hugs, and smiles. It was a good day. It was the best of times. That day, too, was a homecoming. 27 years later, we returned to Warsaw. This is our homecoming. This is our time for celebration and homecoming, our time for reflection. To walk through the streets of Warsaw today is to be reminded of both the power and the necessity of rebirth. The story of Warsaw is, among other things, the story of rebirth. This is an ancient story. Rebirth and renewal are everyone's story. It is every culture's story. It is a universal story. And I will leave it to you to decide whether this story is best told through logos or mythos. While we remain faithful to the original inspiration of our society, we have not rigidly clung to the first formulation of our founding principles. By remaining faithful to the spirit and ethos of our founding ideals, we have entered into an ongoing great conversation among differing points of view with a vision towards developing richer and deeper understandings of freedom, justice, and human solidarity. Along the way, we have changed. Our society has changed. The International Society for Universalism evolved into the International Society for Universal Dialogue. The resulting emphasis on dialogue alongside universality was not a rejection of our founding ideals, but perhaps a dialectical movement towards working out the promise within that original vision. And yet, as always, we must ask ourselves what has been gained and what has been lost. If philosophers are to be, as Edmund Husserl expressed it, the functionaries of mankind, if we are to honor our commitment and our responsibility as philosophers, we must constantly seek to critique and renew our most basic ways of thinking. There has always been tension between the concepts of dialogue and universality. This tension is the reflection of a deeper tension at the heart of the dialectics between identity and difference. This tension we dare not resolve. This tension is the source of creativity. This tension is the source of renewal. Those forms of universalism that place too much emphasis on our shared identities too often blind us to our significant differences. Those forms of pluralism that place too much emphasis on our differences too often blind us to our commonalities and shared identities. We want a universalism that does not sacrifice particularity for sameness. We want a pluralism that does not sacrifice universality for difference. Dialogue works to keep the tension between identity and difference alive and vibrant as it seeks ever better formulations and understandings of goodness, justice, and truth. To best practice this ideal of dialogue, we must recognize the limitations of any absolute single point of view. We must remember that any conceptual framework powerful enough to reveal something of importance will also conceal something of importance. To best practice this ideal, we must interpret the point of view of the other as generously as our sense of rationality will allow. We must be open to any kernel of truth that may be found in the standpoint of the other. Being open to finding some truth in the standpoint of the other, and perhaps more importantly, having the resolve to practice this ideal, seems to be a necessary condition for the sort of exchange of ideas that leads not only towards peace and solidarity, but also towards more encompassing and more stable forms of truth. We must also recognize that the willingness to entertain and possibly adopt some or all of the other's perspective is more than a merely academic exercise. Critical reflection on one's own core assumptions about self and world comes with a risk. The risk of destabilizing not only one's worldview, but also one's sense of self-identity. But with this risk comes the promise of critique, clarification, and renewal. The promise of a renewal of our worldviews and our sense of identity. Dialogue is not an adversarial debate that seeks to inform and set the other straight. Dialogue involves a willingness to work with and to learn from others. Dialogue is a cooperative attempt to reason together. And yet, in much of the everyday practice of our discipline, in much of the everyday practice of philosophy, we offer up argumentative discourse that quickly becomes competitive and confrontational. in the everyday language of American speech, dialogue ain't easy. And yet we are here today to practice this ideal. The story of our society is a story that is still in progress. This is a story whose ending is not yet written. It may still end in tragedy. Although our society was founded in the spirit of renewal, in the spirit of hope, in the spirit of optimism, that a new era of globalization would lead toward a global village in which the children of differences would walk side by side in the spirit of peace and intercultural cooperation. We gather here today in the still lingering shadow of a great summit of military power. We gather here today in the face of rising temperatures, ubiquitous pollution, threats of mass extinction. We gather here today in the face of growing religious fanaticism, rising nationalism, increasing economic inequalities, both within and between nations. Economic equalities that arise through a culture of competition and greed. We gather here today in an era where violence is not only a tool of statecraft, but has become one more personal choice. We gather here today as the world grieves for those personal choices, and yet we gather here today to renew our ideals and values. We gather here today for a summit of dialogue. Each of you have contributed to, and each of you have made this Congress possible by sharing your work and your ideas. This is a forum for your work and your ideas. What we accomplish here over the next 5 days will depend on our practices. Our commitment to dialogue reflects a basic sentiment shared by nearly all, that in some big way we are all in it together. The traditional virtues of loyalty, compassion, generosity, honesty, fairness all reflect a sense of solidarity with others, a sense of common purpose, a sense of a common good. Whatever else dialogue may be, it must be rooted in a sense of shared purpose. It must aim to cultivate intellectual insight, imagination, social responsibility, and the struggle for justice. As philosophers, we must not only promote responsible and enlightened public discourse on the defining issues of our times, we must practice and model such discourse for the public. Our moment in history demands this of us. Dialogue is neither a spectator sport, nor is it a solitary venture. So I invite you to join with others in this project of mutual critique, clarification, and renewal. I invite you to enjoy yourself, to enjoy this wonderful city, to meet new and old friends in this place, in this time. I invite you to open yourselves to the possibilities of dialogue, to the possibilities of a cooperative and rational renewal of our most basic understanding of world and self. We can only hope that we will demonstrate the wisdom, courage, and leadership for our moment in history. And with this in mind, I hereby declare the 11th World Congress of the International Society for Universal Dialogue to be open. Thank you very much.